The bloody event you are about to hear is not suitable for sensitive people. It is perhaps one of the most sadistic and ruthless acts of suffering that have been perpetrated throughout history in the world. Kelly was a 14-year-old girl born in England on May 18th of the year 78. This teenager, so beloved by those around her, was characterized by her maturity and talent for sports. She was always a girl who performed much better in environments with adults. Like a young woman, somewhat advanced for her age, instead of spending the afternoons playing or watching television. After school, she had a teenage job. She worked as a babysitter for families close to her neighborhood. She really liked learning new things, and above all, earning her own money. It was in one of these houses where she worked that she met a man she fell madly in love with. His name was James Patterson Smith, who would become her first boyfriend. The night they first saw each other, he accompanied her almost to her house. They talked throughout the walk, and so it was that this relationship arose over the days. But this courtship, rather than being drawn as the ideal first youthful and romantic love, was extremely repulsive. The huge age difference made it a crime. He, over 40 years old, already smelling of mothballs, and she barely 14 years old. Both knew what they were doing was wrong, especially him, who with all treachery and advantage dissuaded her to keep their relationship a secret, mainly from the girl's parents, Tommy and Margaret Bates, who would clearly object upon seeing that their little daughter's boyfriend was even older than her own father, convinced that he was the man of her dreams. She fell for that perverse love affair for 2 years that would cost her life. The couple managed to have their encounters and remain anonymous for a long time. It wasn't until the girl turned 16 that she dared to confront her parents and confess about the romance. She gathered all her courage, not only to reveal the identity of her partner, but also to let them know that she would leave home to start a new life with him. Annie packed her bags and left home full of hope and irrevocably in love with Smith. She arrived at her new home located on Furnival Road, Gorton, Greater Manchester, having no idea of the distressing fate that awaited her. Over time, the change in the young woman's personality became very noticeable. The energetic and active girl they remembered was now overshadowed by someone whose temperament was declining a little more each time. She was no longer seen at the hockey team practices she belonged to, and her spirit seemed greatly consumed by the instability of her relationship. The couple used to argue daily, leaving behind those happy memories with which they had started. Even on one occasion, Kelly was so affected by a strong altercation she had with this man, with the old man, that without thinking she ran terrified to her parents' house. They separated for a brief period of time. However, by that time, Smith already had absolute control of the girl's mind. He manipulated her easily after almost 3 years of relationship. So by November of '95, the then 17-year-old girl returned to the side of her future murderer. By that time, the parents' concern had intensified. They began to detect signs of beatings, some bruises, and a bite on her body. But she explained to them that these were just domestic accidents. She assured all was fine and continued residing on Furnival Road. The passing of the days did not dispel the fear that something was happening to her. On the contrary, her distancing became more evident, and by December of '95, it was known that she had quit her job. She was no longer seen visiting her parents' house and rarely answered their calls. When she did, she was curt and evasive, as if she was being watched or threatened. Seeking answers, one of Bates's brothers knocked on the couple's door, but only received denials from Smith, who told him she was not at home. In turn, a neighbor, aware that the girl was being mistreated, also tried to ask about her, but could only see her for a brief moment through the second-floor window. No one could explain her prolonged absence. However, since she was under that roof of her own free will, there wasn't much room for anyone to help her. In early March, Tommy and Margaret Bates supposedly received news from their daughter. For birthdays and anniversaries, some greeting cards had arrived at their door. Upon reading them, the couple noticed certain anomalies, as the expression written on the pages was not exactly Kelly's vocabulary, let alone her handwriting. They were completely unaware of the distressing reality that the 17-year-old girl was experiencing at that moment. Inside the house of the dysfunctional couple, the worst kind of hell was being lived. For about a month, James Patterson Smith gave in to his darkest demons, mercilessly torturing his girlfriend, causing her endless distress. The abuse, however, had started years ago. manipulating and taking advantage of her. Now, at his mercy, he left her without food and water to weaken her gradually. When he finally succeeded, he proceeded to physically abuse her. So Kelly, despite being malnourished and dehydrated, tried to run towards the exit. But this failed attempt to escape led her to suffer the painful consequences. The torturer tied her hair to a heater, wrapped a rope around her neck, and put a sock in her mouth. He burned her with an iron and put out his cigarettes on her skin. It was a heartbreaking scene. Kelly weakly shedding tears of desperation, silenced by blows and subjected to multiple wounds caused by knives, forks, and scissors. The cuts being superficial to keep her alive, with the sole purpose of continuing to torment her. She only longed for death, but instead received 2 powerful blows, one on each hand, breaking her wrists. As if that wasn't enough, Smith took her by the jaw and opened her mouth to cut her from the inside. It was an endless Red Sea. But perhaps the most sadistic thing for the girl was the mutilation of part of her body, as well as the removal of her eyes, suffered in the flesh. Death came to pity her on April 16th of the year 96. But it was not due to the brutal blows she received, but by drowning. Patterson put her in a tub, submerging her head with his hands. The water reached her lungs, finally causing her the eternal rest she had longed for in the last 4 weeks. It was the same criminal who later showed up at the police station, claiming that he had accidentally taken his girlfriend's life. He created a false scene of a supposed argument between them, assuring that the woman had slipped in the midst of chaos. The police quickly went to the guilty party's home. What they found would haunt their minds, robbing them of peace. The sight of Kelly's naked and grotesquely disfigured body completely broke the authorities. They couldn't believe what lay before them. A red sea throughout the house, strands of hair in the corners, and the sinister sensation of immense pain induced within those walls. Soon, they put the main and only suspect behind bars. The victim's family was notified and called to identify the body, and they realized what they had feared most had finally become a reality. Their daughter's boyfriend had taken her life. The autopsy revealed over 150 injuries all over the victim's body, including bruises, wounds, burns, fractures, and amputations. It was determined that her eyes had been gouged out, no less than 5 days and no more than 3 weeks before her death, according to data provided by the pathologist. Everyone involved in solving this horrific murder agreed that her death had been a merciful end to her torment. But who was this beast capable of such atrocity? James was an unemployed man, but with a facade of being kind and good-natured. His acquaintances had no idea that behind that mask hid a true monster. However, when investigated, all the atrocities committed by him came to light. A violent person with an extremely alarming history of domestic abuse. He had been married for 10 years to a woman from whom he divorced in the 80s due to physical abuse. From there date his first signs of being an abuser. But it was Tina Watson who spoke openly about her experience by his side. She was a 20-year-old girl who became emotionally involved with him after the divorce. The authorities were able to contact her because they share a son in common. The story that Watson tells, so unpleasant that it must have been just then when the man had to be arrested. But out of fear, he was never reported.
On the other hand, a girl named Wendy Mothershed also joined the list of witnesses.
She told how in the year 82, when she was 15 years old, she had a relationship with the subject, also a victim of violence. She met the same fate as the other two, being the object of beatings enduring the blows inflicted by the man. Wendy was a survivor of the attempted murder by the now murderer, similarly almost drowned in her kitchen sink. Unfortunately, it was she who crossed his path at 14 years old, completely unaware of his true intentions. She fell in love to such a degree that she hid her relationship for 2 years, went against her parents, and immersed herself in the torture instigated by her lover, a true psychopath. Getting the worst part of the story, it was her rest that finally put this aggressive, abusive lover of the little ones behind bars. Adding another shade of perversity to the story, the authorities had to listen to the incredible tale that the accused put forth in order to save himself from going to jail or reducing his sentence. In his twisted, bloody world, he claimed that Bates would take him to hell and leave him lifeless. Supposedly in the midst of a toxic relationship of abuse on both sides, it was the woman, the girl, who provoked him, initially by making fun of his dead mother, followed by alleged self-harm to blame him. He was firmly convinced that many of the injuries detected on Loxisa's body had been caused by herself. However, when questioned about how it would be possible for someone to have the strength and conviction to gouge out their own eyes, he had the audacity to declare that it had been Kelly's request, a kind of twisted challenge in which she allegedly dared him to do things to harm her body. The defendant, in his perception, considered himself innocent and firmly believes that the murder was a simple accident. However, justice obviously dissuades from this absurd testimony and even considered him paranoid. This is because he was subjected to a psychiatric test by Gillian Massey, a specialist in the field. The results were presented in court, pointing out as a person with a severe paranoid disorder with morbid jealousy, ensuring that the subject's mind lived in a distorted reality. It only took an hour in the Manchester Crown Court to find him guilty of the murder of Kelly Annie Bates. The then 49-year-old defendant was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 20 years to be served, before parole could be considered for any reason. Unfortunately, the family of the deceased woman couldn't do much more than advise her to leave her partner, as after several attempts at social services they only received negatives considering Kelly as an adult since she was already 16 years old. Even on one occasion the mother went to the police station to report the assaults, but without the victim present, she could not proceed. This case is full of inhumane acts that were shown uncensored in the courtroom. Not only was the family highly affected, but everyone involved in the trial, who even had to receive psychological attention to be able to process the unpleasant images that they had to analyze one by one. But if you like this video, don't forget to follow me on my social networks, and if you have any paranormal story that now that we are in the month of Halloween you would like me to tell, you can send it to my email, which is email@pepamysterio.com.mx, or if not, send it to me by inbox or by Instagram.